describing our mission, which really is a healthy future for wildlife, people, and planet. And that's our vision, and our mission is really all about transforming science into impact through discovery, education, engagement, as well as policy to ensure a healthy future for wildlife and the environment that we all depend on. And why do we do this? It may sound obvious, but I like to tell people that we do this because we need nature, and now nature needs us. And what I mean by that, we need nature for all the ecosystem goods and services that we actually depend upon, whether it's clean air, fresh water, climate stabilization, pollination services, the things that basically allow us to survive as a society. And when I say nature needs us, I often get pushback. People say, oh, no, nature will be just fine. They don't need us. Nature doesn't need us. And our point is, we believe that nature needs us to be more mindful stewards, that we need to respect what's left of wild nature and recognize that we need to treat it like an investment in the bank. We need to live off of the interest that natural capital, natural resources generates without mining what's left of wild nature, because future generations depend on that kind of stewardship. So that's really the why in our center. I'm going to quickly run through sort of the 4 types of things that we do. And the center is comprised of faculty, staff, students at the Veterinary College, but also increasingly across Cornell, and we have partners around the world. And we often are finding ourselves responding to health threats to the survival of key species. A lot of us provide landscape-level guidance on wildlife-compatible land use policy and practice. We have programs that work with U.S. states. We work with specific countries or regional bodies or multilateral organizations like the FAO, for example. A lot of our work is about minimizing the movements of diseases between wildlife, our domestic animals, particularly livestock, and people. And all those things really rolled up into that last pillar, which I call building new constituencies for wildlife conservation. What I mean by that is, in many of the places that I know I work around the world, countries are struggling to give their citizens even the most basic services. And so conservation is understandably, in those circumstances, a bit of a luxury. But part of what we try and do is use good science to show how the conservation of biodiversity actually improves public health outcomes. For example, mitigating the risks of pandemics, or improves prospects for sustainable agriculture through improved land use practices and better stewardship writ large. So a lot of what we do is try and make the constituency for conservation bigger, because we need everybody's support. We're, as I tell our students, we're sort of in a all hands on deck moment. So with that as quick introduction, I'm going to introduce our speaker. And I will say that Dr. Pete Coppolillo and I got to know each other when we both had worked for the Wildlife Conservation Society many moons ago. And Pete is a career conservationist. And he started at WCS, the Wildlife Conservation Society, first at the headquarters at the Bronx Zoo, and then in Ruaha, Tanzania, as part of WCS's Africa program, and later in the Greater Yellowstone as part of the North America program. Like many conservationists, Pete is a generalist, and I'll add editorially, an optimist, because you have to be, having worked on avian community ecology, raptor biology, large herbivore grazing systems, eco-hydrology, and a variety of One Health issues. And One Health is what I was referring to. It's really recognizing that our health is intimately related to the health of wildlife, the health of livestock, and of course, to the health of our environment. So Pete's a One Health colleague. In 2012, Pete became the executive director of Working Dogs for Conservation, where he has overseen significant growth of the organization and conservation dog field. Today, Working Dogs for Conservation has nearly 100 dogs on the ground around the world, carrying out projects focused on ecological monitoring, biosecurity, wildlife crime, as well as environmental justice. Pete's joining us today from Bozeman, Montana, and he lives there with his artist partner and 2 bird dogs that I'm betting appear in this presentation. Pete, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out on a snowy night, especially in the middle of the week after normal hours. Is the sound level okay? If I'm blasting you away, it's okay? Okay. If I get too exuberant and it gets too loud, you guys just tell me to calm down or something. thank you, Steve, for having me and for the opportunity to talk about our work, because we're off in Montana and then in the field all over the place, and we've got our heads down doing our work, and it's incredibly valuable to come to places like this where we can interact with all the different entities, because we do touch on a lot of things. We glide between lots of different types of projects, and we depend a lot on veterinary support and you know, being good to our dogs because we want to, but also because we really invest a lot in them and depend on them. So this has been a fabulous 3 days that I've been here, just drinking from the fire hose and getting great ideas and planning all sorts of empires to build and great things to do. So thank you for having us and for being here. This is a fun talk to give because yesterday's talk was all about work in progress. I like to, when you go to hear somebody speak, you know, if you could have just read the paper, then why not stay home and just read the paper, right? So I like to share some inside stories, what's coming, what's new, and this is not a comprehensive history of the conservation dog field, but you'll get a flavor for all the things that conservation dogs are doing, but it's also a little bit of a snapshot of what's on the horizon and what's new and what we're working on. But in order to get into it, I will start, there we go, with a little background, right? So all of these are species that I personally know people who've worked on these. These species, they can go whole field seasons, whole years, sometimes more, multiple years without ever seeing one of these animals. So if someone comes to me and says, how do I conserve wolverine or lynx or snow leopard? And I don't know where they live. I don't know what they eat. I don't know what eats them, what pathogens they've got, any of those things. It's really difficult to give good guidance on how we're going to save them, right? So often as biologists, what we end up doing is we intensify. You know, we put in more resources. And this is an example from my history. That's a pronghorn antelope. This is in Pinedale, Wyoming. Some of you might know this story about pronghorn disappeared from Grand Teton National Park for over 50 years. And then all of a sudden they reestablished a migration. At the time, we thought it was the longest migration in the lower 48. It wasn't, but they migrated back into the park. And so we had to figure out where are they wintering, which animals are coming back. And so we put out 72 radio collars in 36 hours. It cost us over $200,000 to do this work. And not only that, pronghorn capture, we had a fabulous crew. Some of you might know about Rick Swisher and Quicksilver. They were amazing. We didn't injure or lose an animal on this, but pronghorn capture operations, particularly back in the day, could have mortality up to 20% of the animals that they handled. So it's incredibly expensive. It can be dangerous for the animals, and it can be dangerous for the people. This is sorry, stole my own thunder there. Sorry. This is Rick's helicopter. Same helicopter we flew in 3 weeks after, and they were on a wolf capture in Idaho. They banked around to dart a wolf and lost the tail rotor, and Rick was an absolute hero. He put the helicopter down on his side. Fortunately, everybody did live, but as you can see, they did not walk away. The helicopter was a write-off, and it was a bad day for everybody. So the upshot of it was, we need better ways and to think about working on wildlife, things that are safer for people, safer for wildlife, and quite frankly less expensive. And there's the solution that we have to offer. It's a dog's nose, and the truth is that a dog's nose really is the best chemical sensor the world has ever known. And that's not hyperbole. That's the truth. Partly because they do have incredibly low thresholds for odor detection. There are labs that compete to see who's got the best noses. People say now it's down to single digits of parts per trillion. But honestly, the most important thing about a dog's nose is that it's attached to a dog, right? It's attached to this animal that co-evolved with us that loves us, that wants to interact with us, and that will follow us to the field, up and down the mountains, over logs, and will learn new odors in a heartbeat, in an afternoon. So that flexibility has great power. And so in the mid-90s, four women founded our organization called Working Dogs for Conservation. And it really came from being able to get recovered DNA from feces. And all of a sudden, everybody wanted to find all the scat that they could. And so these guys said, well, working with Sam Wasser at the University of Washington, and interestingly, a law enforcement officer who was the head of the Canine unit for the Washington Department of Corrections, they did some of the first the first conservation dog work in North America, finding grizzly bear scats. So this is kind of how it works. The handler will walk a transect, but that dog is quartering back and forth, sampling a lot more. They cover sometimes 2 times, sometimes 3 times the distance that the handler travels, because they're dogs and they're excited and they're working and they know they're there to find things. But they're sampling, because of this superpower for olfaction, they're sampling a much larger area than the I'm just going to skip and stay here. Than the handler is covering, or that they're even physically covering, because odor travels. So if you've got odor off of the transect and it's floating in from a scat or an invasive plant or whatever they're looking for, the dogs will sometimes, you'll see them. They'll be working and their head will go up and they'll turn and straight in. They'll go in for a target. So that distance, we've had dogs go as far as 600 meters off of a transect to go find a sample. It's not always that long. It varies by samples, but it's they have extraordinary abilities to find these things. So that opens a huge number of doors for us in terms of detecting species, and I'll show you a little bit of data on that. But our field is growing. It's growing rapidly, as our organization is. And so these are just mentions and uses of conservation. This is just conservation detection. I'll show you a little bit about tracking and a little bit about discrimination later on. This is from a review, and I think it was 2021, of projects, not just our projects, all over the world. But as you can see, it's increasing. It's becoming increasingly common. And I'm sure many of you are aware of conservation dog projects that are happening. And when people do use conservation dogs, they're doing it for a good reason, because the dogs are the best option. I'll show you some different data here. This, I think, is not the most interesting of the results that they found, because obviously if you're going to the trouble of hiring somebody like us or training a dog or doing it yourself, you've probably exhausted the normal conventional methods. But the point of it is that dogs can be really good at this. We call this the greatest hits slide. These are some of the results that have come from us and some from other people. When we started doing this work with kit fox, the first 1,300 kit fox scats they were correct on, and that's a big deal, because these kit fox co-occur with red foxes, with badgers, which are the things that you could confuse the scats on. And then you go all the way down to finding. You'll see a picture of the dog who did this 60 times, greater than 60 times actually, because there were humans with an experimentally hidden rat, and the humans never found it. 5 people searching for over an hour. Sammy found it in 5 minutes on a ship. So they can do amazing things, and that's part of the reason of the growth of our field. This is our organization in one slide, if we have to talk about it. We've been around for quite a while now. The 4 women founded it in the mid-90s. We registered as an NGO in 2000, and now we've grown to almost 100 dogs. And we'll hire our 20th staff member this year in a lot of different places. So back in the day, we used to do just project field work. This is Amy Hurt. She's one of the founders. That's Wicket. Many of you have heard me talk about Wicket, probably the most experienced conservation dog. She's no longer with us. She lived to 16 and worked till after 13. We used to take our dogs out and we'd do the projects. We'd run them all and then go home. But what we learned is that a lot of people just want to hear about what we're doing. So we started consulting and saying, well, if you want to do what we're doing, here's how you do it. And then when we started getting into the law enforcement world, and this is now true for biosecurity as well, law enforcement, you got to be there 24/7, 365. So we started with capacity building. So those are the kind of how we work, and these are the things that we work on. And I'll jump through all of these, ecological monitoring, law enforcement, biosecurity, and environmental justice. And I'll share with you just some of the bread and butter work that we do for each of these, but also some of the cool and emerging things that are going on. I want to just touch on, I guess you'd call it our values. It's another dimension on how we work. We rescue the dogs that we train. That's for both practical and ethical reasons, but it's also it's something we're all proud of, and it's something I'm proud of our trainers, because training a rescue dog where you don't know many of you guys know this. I know from the Behavior Institute, probably know it far better than I do. But when their first year or 18 months or sometimes more than that are a black hole and we don't know where they came from, what their experiences are, that really changes the approach. And so we do a lot more of meeting them where they are, as opposed to getting specialty bred dogs from Europe who are all expected to be carbon copies of one another. So it's a nice kind of dimension that I'm certainly very proud of. The other part of our work that I'm proud of is that we consider ourselves open source. So when we learn something, when we do something, we want others to replicate it. We're just 20 people in Montana. And we really firmly believe that the whole rest of the world needs lots of conservation dogs. So anytime we can share what we've done and what we learned, we do that. And I'll give you a few more examples of that. But because we're at Cornell, I feel it's okay to share a little bit of data, even though it's after hours. Many of these studies overlap with the same Grimm and Seyfarth review papers, but this is something we started over 10 years ago, just looking at basically your bang for your buck with dogs, right? When is it that this is the ratio of a dog to a conventional method? And we use catch per unit effort. Many of you might know that from fisheries and harvest data. It just means how much are you getting per unit of effort? And units of effort could be dollars spent, miles walked, days in the field, whatever. But what's your return on that sort of investment? And if you plot the line here, that's 1. So that's the red line is where dogs and the conventional methods are equal, right? And it's low, but that's the same. This is a biased sample, right? Anybody's using dogs because they're going to use them because it's the best option. So that's relatively uninteresting. But what we wanted to know is, what are the characteristics of these targets that really make it a great investment? And these, maybe not so much. And what we found is that when you have animals at extremely low densities, that maybe one wolf in a mountain range or one wolverine or something like that, you get higher bang for your buck. When they're cryptic species, they're just difficult. They're hard to find. They're either in burrows, in leaf litter, whatever, or in structurally complex environments. You get a lot more out of it. Another kind of cool thing is that dogs are unbiased. So this is Bryn. Bryn is a South African Belgian Malinois, lives in South Africa, and that is a geometric tortoise. And that little guy could sell for $10,000 in China. And the reason this photograph is shot straight down is so that there are no marks, no visible landscape in the photograph, so that no one could take that photo and figure out where to go get a geometric tortoise. But what's special about this photo is that it's tiny. This is one of the tiny little juvenile tortoise. And they use different microhabitats than the adults. So we are always updating a model in our heads of where we expect to find things, right? Well, the dogs don't do that. And so Bryn was able to show Vicky Hudson, who's his handler in South Africa, who was our collaborator on this project, that these little guys were using different habitats than the adults. And so they were able to protect those. This happens to be an area where there is tourism and recreation, and so they can protect those microhabitats for an endangered species. Okay, so the four, Steve mentioned the 4 pillars. We also have 4 pillars, and this is the first one, is wildlife crime. This is just law enforcement. And a lot of our law enforcement work has been in Africa, but we also now work a lot here in North America. And a lot of it is pretty standard stuff. If somebody's trying to smuggle guns or ammunition into a protected area, or ivory or bushmeat or illegal timber or whatever out of a protected area. Dogs can inspect, and we train them to do that. This is a particular program in Kyrgyzstan where we help them repurpose a lot of their customs dogs to do wildlife crime work. But I'm gonna tell you a little bit about some of our other kind of a little bit more cutting edge kind of new projects that are doing kind of interesting things for law enforcement. This is called RASCO, Remote Air Sampling for Canine Olfaction. Basically, the idea is that so much wildlife are trafficked in containers, shipping containers. And shipping containers, when they leave the port, get a custom seal on them. It's like a big zip tie that closes it. And so it's not only is it administratively or bureaucratically difficult to get permission to open those containers. Once you open the container, it's just stuff, right? So you have to unload everything if you want to physically inspect it. So this is actually an older technique. It's been around for a long time, but it was so expensive that the conservation community couldn't use it. So the idea is what you do is you suck air out of the vent of the container, you pass it through a filter, and then we present the filters to the dogs, right? And the dog will tell us if their target odor is inside that container, the dog will alert to the filter. And then we can say to the customs authority or whoever, hey, inspect that sort of, that container. And they're great at this. It's really, so these are little experiments. And what we did was we developed with our colleagues at WWF in traffic, we developed a system where you can set it up and use it for under $100. So that's just a regular battery-powered vacuum sucking the air out, and we use filters that are cotton. They cost less than $1 each, and off we go. And so our colleagues, they're piloting this in Cape Town and Kenya right now for wildlife crime projects. So it's great. It opens the door to shipping containers, which a tiny fraction are actually inspected. This is another cool new technology. These are, that's a little camera called a trail guard. It's made by an NGO called Resolve in DC. And it's like any other trail cam that you might see, or a camera trap. It's got a lens and an infrared sensor. But there are two kind of particularly important things about these guys. That part of it is about as big as your two fingers. It's about that long. You can hide them really easily. That's one important thing. But they have an artificial intelligence chip in it. So it interprets what's in the image. So if an elephant or a baboon or an impala or whatever walks by, it records it to the card and leaves it there. But if a human walks by, it uses the second important part of the camera, which is the satellite phone. It's wired to a satellite phone. And when a human is in the image, it emails that to us or the canine unit or the anti-poaching warden. And the reason for that is because in virtually all protected areas in Africa, it's illegal to walk in on foot for safety reasons, but also for law enforcement, for security reasons. So what that enables is us to scramble a dog team, tracking team, and this is Sydney Mjovu and Christopher Mwamba from Zambia, and that's Cassie and Jean, who came to the States to learn tracking specifically because of these cameras. And long story short, we've had to repurpose a lot of detection dogs in order to start tracking when we kind of came onto this technology. And early days of the technology in Serengeti, the dogs were just starting to learn to track, doing short little tracks, 100 meters, straight line, whatever. Learning, because, to set them up for success, they do it over and over, and then you get longer, and then you put the turns in and do all of those things. Dogs were doing 100-yard tracks, just starting to learn, getting a little more confident, and then one night, these two photographs came in. This one is a guy walking out, away from the camera, into the bush, and he's carrying supplies probably for a poaching camp in the bush. This one is unequivocal. We know exactly what's going on here. These are meat drying racks. This is bush meat that they're walking back out from the bush with bush meat. So the anti-poaching warden called us and said, "Hey, are those dogs ready to track yet?" And we said, "I don't know, but let's try. Let's see." 14 kilometers later, with 2 dogs that actually traded off, tracking through Serengeti, where you've got lions and leopard and elephants and buffalo and everything, at night, they caught 6 poachers, over 600 snares, and 900 pounds of bushmeat at the camp. And they've continued to have results like that ever since. A lot of work has happened since then, validating the cameras. This was a test in South Africa, and now the cameras put a bounding box on every individual that they see, and you can see it's amazing. They get even a partial individual in a vehicle, they get it. And this is what the cameras look like now. That's actually 3 cameras. So this is a big deal for us because it really ups our game in terms of being able to help our partners in Africa, but also here, any place where you want to secure a site, to be able to do that. But what's really cool about this technology and its combination with the dogs is that we can scramble a dog team and get them out there before an elephant or a rhino or anything gets killed. So let's see if you can see Christopher and Jean here. This is them in Indiana, which was in the winter, and they were good sports to come. But this is them learning to track, and you can see how excited Jean is to do his job and to track. And these guys can move through the bush very quickly. What we do is we deploy them with a cover team, an armed cover team, who the dogs do what's called a proximity alert. So when they get close when they shift basically from ground scent to air scent, they know they're getting close to the person they've been tracking, which is presumably the poacher. The dog does a proximity alert, stops, and then the cover team goes in and makes the arrest. So it's just a hugely powerful method, and we're really excited about it. And the exciting thing is that the dogs are useful on their own. Those cameras are useful on their own. But man, when you put them together, it's really a great combination. Okay, second pillar is ecological monitoring. I'll tell you a little about that, about some of the different species. But that ecological monitoring is just a fancy way of saying, figuring out, are things increasing or decreasing? Where do they live? What do they eat? What's stressing them out? All those questions I mentioned at the top about difficult species to work on. The first one I'll tell you about is a saola. This is a saola. It's actually a bovid, so related to cattle. And it was only discovered in the 90s in Laos. It lives in the Annamite Mountains, which look like that, incredibly rugged. Think of the structurally complex landscapes where the bang for your buck comes from. This is one of those. And they're very cryptic. They're at low densities. They were probably never very abundant, but a saola has not been seen in the wild, recorded scientifically at least, in the wild since 2013. So the Saola Foundation approached us and said, can you help us on a 2-year push to find them? The government of Laos and Vietnam have agreed to establish protected areas wherever there are Saola in the Annamite Mountains. And so these are Norman and Bertie. They're spaniels, and they're with the canine unit in the Annamite Mountains. This is not an easy environment to work in, but the dogs are out there and they're finding lots of scats, and there's a huge backlog now to go through genetic analysis to see if any of them are Saola. So stay tuned for that. It'll be big news if there is one. But one interesting dimension to this is already the teams that are out there have discovered a new species of primate, a leaf monkey, in the Annamite Mountains. So the return on the conservation return on that investment is already there. It's not an easy environment. I'm going to return to this idea, but we have had to really be very vigilant about health and safety for the dogs, because this is what a normal transect looks like. And these are probably forests that had rhino and elephants and other things opening up the forest, and that hasn't happened for generations now. So they're all thick and overgrown. I'll mention another one. This is genomic mark and recapture. That's just a fancy way of saying counting wolves. Many of you may know that in our part of the world, the Northern Rockies, counting wolves is a very controversial topic. I won't go into all the details, but the states have adopted a model based on distribution, on spatial distribution. It's called IPOM, Integrated Patch Occupancy Models. And basically, colleagues recently were concerned about it in the first place and have then demonstrated that the IPOM overestimates abundance, and not by a little bit, by a factor of 2.5. And this is why. It makes assumptions about occupied habitat. And if you have a patchy distribution, which we know that we have in Montana, it overestimates really significantly, 150%. So just before I got on the airplane to leave here, there were 5 wolf bills in the Montana legislature, all of which specified population targets. So one of them was 400 animals, right? So if you're estimating 400 animals, but you're overestimating by 2.5, we're down to perilously low numbers again. So this is really quite important sort of work to figure out and to offer a better way to count the animals, and if necessary, to hold others accountable to say you're hunting them down to too low of numbers. There are a huge number of participants in this project. Again, stay tuned, and we'll tell you how it goes. But the upshot of it is that we're developing estimation and return curves for surveying wolves at the den sites, at known rendezvous sites. If you guys know wolf biology, they've got these sites, the areas where they come to rendezvous in their home ranges while they're hunting, and then just out in the world, at hunting where they're making their carcass, or in their hunting and foraging areas. And what that's going to allow us to do is get more reliable and better wolf numbers. Interestingly, we've already had queries about working here in the Northeast, using it for Mexican wolves. So we're going to continue to do a lot of this work. And this is one of the things that is important. A lot of people expect us to say that we're using the dogs to replace these other technologies. And just like the cameras, dogs are a complement to all of these. That's Amy Hurt again. That's in Cameroon, surveying for cross river gorillas. And we just collected all the scats, but then all the scats went in for analysis for Ebola, a population estimate. So, as new lab techniques become possible, then that opens new doors for doing things with scat and non-invasively. So we're always watching these other techniques, whether it's drones or this is a biomeme machine. Many of you may know what those are. It's to do PCR in the field. New techniques like microhistology. That's a moose pellet to figure out what moose have been eating and what parasites they have. And I'll tell you a little more about some of the other contaminant work we do with mink and otter. But the point is that technologies like eDNA can give you a result. They can say there's a fish or an invasive species or something here. But then the next step is, okay, where here, right? We just got a query from Waikambas National Park in Indonesia. They, with eDNA, detected rhinos outside of the rhino sanctuary. So now we're going to come in with the dogs and help identify where they are. And it was eDNA that did that. So I just want to emphasize that these are complementary strategies, and they sort of go together. This is an interesting one. One of our staff has her Ph.D. in wildlife forensics, and she said, we're leaving a lot of good information on the table here because there's a lot that we can find out from scats. So that's a mink, otter, and badgers. Just from collecting their scats, we can recover lots of different contaminants. We can know what they're being exposed to, and that's really valuable because we might go to the area and we might not be able to find these contaminants in the water or the soil or plants or whatever. And even if we do, somebody might say, well, who cares? That's, it's not affecting anything. Well, if it's with these guys, we know it's in aquatic food webs, and these guys are out sampling the environment and bioconcentrating those contaminants. So we use these guys, we call this a sentinel species approach, right? We're collecting all the scats from these guys, and then it tells us about the environment that they're living in. And that's important. I'll return to it in a second. But after a while, there was so much going on that Nio edited a whole book on just using conservation dogs for aquatic ecosystems. So it's really opened the door to a lot of work. And one of those things one of the opportunities came to us through, this is a woman named Suta calling last. She's Blackfeet, and she runs an organization called Indigenous Vision. And she said, hey, here on the Blackfeet Nation, we've got a history of legacy dumping, chemical dumping, and also some ongoing dumping. And we've got a lot of traditional hunters who are eating more wild game than most of the white folks who only hunt for 5 weeks out of the year. Tribal members are allowed to hunt all year. And they're eating more game. They're eating it over a longer time period and have less access to health care. So it was a big concern about traditional lifeways and how to make those safer. So using traditional ecological knowledge and identifying traditional hunting areas, Suta and some of the elders identified areas for surveying, and we went out with looking for mink and otter to survey. And the sites with no results, unfortunately, are areas where mink and otter are now absent. So there's one limitation to the sentinel species model, but now we know with a high degree of certainty that they're actually not there. So that's a concern. But we've gotten results from these other areas, and now we're gonna move on other areas that are traditionally used, but also outside of the reservation. So this is a big, beautiful part. That's Glacier National Park, if you are familiar with it. That's the international boundary with Canada. And it's a big landscape, and it's very remote. So it's really useful to be able to get in there and to efficiently use those sentinel species to tell us what's going on. Okay, I'm going to spend a little more time on biosecurity and invasive species. I kind of have to keep moving and go fast, but biosecurity is why I'm here this week, because this is a relatively new area for us. We grew a lot around law enforcement, and I think over the last 10 years, and I think the next 10 years, this is where we're going to be growing and doing a whole lot more because of invasive species, because of climate change, because of global commerce moving things around. Everything is aligning to say, biosecurity is a big issue. And if you follow that world, this is the classic EDRR, early detection and rapid response curve. And I certainly was a bit of a newbie to this, and ounce of prevention, right? So we're going to use the dogs to prevent introductions. And here's a great example. Unfortunately, many of you might know or have personal experience with zebra and quagga mussels or scars on your feet because of them. But the zebra and quagga mussels came from Eurasia. They invade systems. They're moved around on boats, and they cause millions of dollars in damage. Literally millions of dollars in the first year that they encrust infrastructure. They're a mess. So the province of Alberta does not have zebra and quagga mussels, and they'd like to keep it that way. So they approached us and said, can we train some dogs to do boat inspections? And we said, absolutely, that's wonderful. So, it is, interestingly, in Montana, you are legally required to stop at a boat inspection. And about 20 or 30% of people actually do stop for boat inspections. In Alberta, you're not legally required, but close to 100% of people stop for them. So a little microcosm there. But often there's an inspector between you and your day on the water, right? People are on their way out to go be on the water, so they don't want to be stuck in a big long line waiting to be inspected. So I thought that the thing that was going to be so amazing about using the dogs for these inspections was that they're going to get every mussel. Nobody's going to get past them, right? Not only do they detect the mussels, they detect the veligers, the larvae, the invisible larvae that we can't see. And that's pretty cool, but I'm a geek, and so nobody cared about that. What the inspectors really love is that the dogs can do big boats, like that, or even these catamaran, cabin cruiser, party boat kind of things. They can do them in about 3 minutes. It might take an inspector an hour to do a boat like that. So people who are normally used to be grumpy when they see the inspector coming, or they have to pull out to do this, now they're all excited. They want to watch the dogs work, and they can't believe how quickly they do it. And Cindy and her team are brilliant, and so they decided to take advantage of this. So they made trading cards for the dogs. So when your boat gets sniffed, it says you've been sniffed, and you get them. So kids will come to these boat stations, and they'll jump out and they'll say, "Who's the dog? Who's here?" And they've seen him on the news, and it's wonderful. So what was an inconvenience and an annoying thing is now a great an attraction, and it's been great. We also did some work with the state of Minnesota on emerald ash borer, another one, unfortunately, you guys may know about. This was a very complicated one because we trained on the adults, the larvae, and the eggs. But in order to know what to inspect for the dogs, we also had to train on ash wood. Because if you've got wood or mulch like that, nobody knows. The inspector can't look at that and say that's ash or that's not. Well, there's only going to be ash borers in ash. So we had to have one dog who worked on ash, and then another who detected all of those things. And as it turns out, you won't be surprised to learn they were really good at it. Here's another example that's just recent from Carrie Brown Lima here at Cornell with spotted lanternfly. This was work we did a number of years ago, but the publication just came out about it. So they've continued to help with other invasive species, including other invertebrates. This is a Fender's blue butterfly. It's an endangered species. It's been on the list for quite a long time. And in fact, we were asked to bring in not to find the butterflies, but to find their host plant. They live on Kincaid's lupin. And I'm sure that virtually all of you are better botanists than I am. But even credible botanists have a hard time differentiating Kincaid's lupin from other species of lupin. So they said, can your dogs discriminate? Can they tell the difference between them? And this is a second superpower that dogs have. Everybody knows that they can detect very low thresholds of odor, tiny bits of scent. What they're also really good at is telling the difference between two very similar odors. And this is one example of that. So this was early days. It's been a long time since we did this work. But almost 400 trials, the dogs were presented with common lupin, Kincaid's lupin, and one other species, and they were 98% accurate. They're amazing at differentiating. So that was really the beginning of a whole lot of plant work for us. And we've worked on spotted knapweed and some other stuff, and in fact a whole bunch of other plants now. And this is actually an incomplete list. So if you remember those dogs in Alberta, now when they're not doing boat inspections, they're working on invasive plants. This is Thesium. It's one that in their part of the world. So we can repurpose the dogs. We can do lots of different things with them. And in fact, it's not just about prevention. One of the things that folks come to us and ask about is about this part, eradication and containment. So they want to know where do these species occur? Where we know we've got an invasive species here, where should we go to contain it and to work on getting rid of it or keep it from spreading? So this is Lily. She's now 17 years old. She's retired. She worked till she was 14. She's working in Iowa at the Neil Smith Refuge on Lespedeza, or Chinese bush clover, which they're working hard to eradicate. And those are Argentine ants. So we can do it for other invertebrates as well. This is an interesting case. It's another plant. It's called Dyer's Woad. That's in northern Utah. And what you can see is it just takes over. Nothing eats it, and it just chokes a lot of other things out. It was brought for dye. That's why it's called Dyer's Woad, to make dye. It was found on Mount Sentinel, right next to Missoula. It's a bad deal because it takes over. It's classified as a noxious weed, and folks identified it relatively early as it was increasing, becoming really abundant. And they had community weed pulls and trying to get rid of it, and they knocked it back pretty good. They were getting it down to more reasonable levels, but they couldn't get rid of it. Couldn't get ahead of it. So they asked us, "Can you guys help? We think we might be missing some plants. Can you guys help?" So this is Seamus. Seamus is also no longer with us. He made it to 16. Worked till he was 14 as well. And Seamus was a very intense border collie. He would bite you as soon as look at you, and so that picture is not inaccurate. So we deployed the dogs, and they sent the human teams out and said, "Okay, we've pulled all the ones that the humans can find. Let's send the dogs out to see if they can find any more." And this is what the environment looks like. It's a rugged environment. If any of you have been to Missoula and know the university there, this is Mount Sentinel. It's where the M is. It's right next to the university. So quite steep, lots of bunch grasses, and it's an intense search. You really search a lot. Those are their tracks. That's where they walked across there. And the first day out, when they found, when we sent Seamus, and we've had a few other dogs work on that project, they found over 500 plants that people missed. So we've been working on Dyer's Woad for a number of years now, and they've really knocked it way, way down. So I'm going to show you some data from this part of the graph. This is now our annual totals, and here's the secret sauce. Here's how they're doing it. They're going out early, and they're getting the plants before they reproduce. This is Fenton. He's one of the new Woad dogs, and as of the end, I think we finished 24 with just 14 plants. So what's happening right now, I think, occasionally there are a few plants that are reproductive, but mostly what we're doing, we're mining the seed bank. Those seeds that have been in the seed bank, one plant can produce 15,000 seeds. So as we get a wet year, we get some more plants. Hopefully that's going to attenuate and go to zero after all the seeds are no longer viable. And just to show off a little, these are some of the, they'll get whole bags of plants some years, but these are the kinds of plants they're finding now. Little bitty. See those on Delete's notebook like that? In that kind of environment, that's what he's finding. That was one, I think, 2 years ago that they found. They had to search for about a half an hour before they found that actual plant. So they're doing a great job. Okay, this is another biosecurity, but this is different. This is disease. This is what I really came here to talk about. The whole talk about was yesterday, and I'm going to need to zip through this pretty quickly. But bighorn sheep have a problem. They get infected with Mycoplasma ovipneumoniae. Gives them pneumonia, and this is how it happens. You get a ram who may not have had reproductive opportunities in his natal herd, and then a herd of domestic sheep will all go into estrus, and they'll come down and consort with them. And they pick up the disease with domestic sheep who don't die of it, they just carry it, and then they'll go back to their natal herd, and then you get a whole herd all age die off. And there are lots of places throughout the West that they're trying to put sheep back into places that they were gone from, and mostly that happens through capturing sheep and moving them around. And what you don't want to do is move a diseased or infected animal around, right? Because you move them to a new mountain range, if there are sheep there, they can infect all of them, or you may be just wasting your time because they're going to die. So these capture operations are intense. And everybody's, there are helicopters in the air, they're moving sheep around, everybody's testing them. It's orderly, but it feels chaotic. And then they send the samples off to the diagnostic lab, and everybody stops, and everything waits. And we have to keep the sheep separate from each other so that they're not infecting each other, the ones that have been captured, and everybody just sits there while we wait for the results to come back. So the Wild Sheep Foundation came to us and said, can we do real-time animal side testing using the dogs? And many of you know our friends at Penn Vet who've done the cancer dogs, and so we said, well, we'll give it a shot. So that's the first part of this, is with active samples, when animals are handled, can we test the swabs and tell you this animal's infected, this one isn't. We're also trying to do it non-invasively so that we can do it from scat so that we don't have to handle animals. And a totally separate component to the project, different dogs, different situation, is can we use guardian dogs to keep them separate from each other? This is how it happens. It happens on scent wheels. Some of you may have seen the cancer dogs work on scent wheels. At least it's how it used to happen. I'll show you how the new way. That's Finn. She's going to work on a sample here. We do it double blind. We do it double blind for two reasons. One is to demonstrate that as a proof of concept, but the other one is so that we're not cueing the dog, right? So Finn goes in a room all by herself. We have a remote camera right there for observation. Everybody sits outside. You're going to watch a little video here. The target is in number 2 there. And then in the other cans, we have distractor overs. It could be anything, cat food, coffee. In this case, it's the scat of uninfected sheep in the containers. Let's see, here goes Finn. Door closes. Handler says, find. And she goes and checks. And when she encounters it, she holds her nose on it. And then the beep, that's the treat and train. It gives her a food reward. And then change the cans and do it all over. It's a great setup, but it's slow. It takes a long time because we have to clean and wash the cans and change them every time. So now we use these fancy gadgets. They're called olfactometers. And they automate the process for us. We can put multiple samples in at once, and then the computer chooses which one it's going to be, and it puffs a little bit of air out there. And this is Leo. He's the king of olfactometers. And I'll show you, this is now, instead of taking every one of those cans off, cleaning them and changing them, you'll see two different reps here of Leo working on the olfactometers. Here he comes. So same process, says go to it. And he doesn't even have to look at any of the other ones. He knows it's in number one. So that's number one. Now this is real time. So instead of having to take those cans off, clean them, change the samples, and do everything, what's happening right now is each of these machines is puffing a little air through it, cleaning out the pathway. And here comes Leo. He's coming back in for another one, for another rep. And he'll do another one. And you can see his little butt, he's wiggling because he's so happy he got it right. Yeah. So these are incredible gadgets. They've sped up our lives. They made life so much easier. But how would we do it in the field? Well, we can take the olfactometers out to the field. We may do that. But we can also recreate a similar situation using, we call them snorkels. They're just PVC pipe. And you can put an odor sample in each one of these. This is Benny working on it. And you see he almost left it, and then he went, whoa, there it is. And there it is. He's getting his reward. So he's getting a toy reward. And you can see how excited he is. That's his paycheck right there. Okay, this is a little bit more data, but here are the accuracies. They're quite good at this. There are some wiggles that I talked about yesterday. If you want to hear about them, I can tell you about them. But here's what, there are some people are like, hey, dogs can't replace labs and diagnostics and veterinarians and all that stuff. And we totally agree. So one of the things we do is we make it clear that we're not intending to replace any of those. One of the things you can do is if you're sampling, catching animals, sampling them, that costs a lot of money and it takes time. And so you might do that once a year. But what you might also do is bring the dog in 3 months later or at 6 months to tell you, hey, it's already back. You need to start doing your diagnostics again earlier. So we may just use them just to trigger testing. Or you might get a ton of samples and you say, how do I prioritize these? Maybe we don't have enough money to test them all, or it's going to take a long time. Well, you might run them past the dog, and if the dog hits on these two, send those two in first, and then let the other ones follow. Or if you're really confident in the dog, what you can do is test those and then subsample the rest, right? Just to see, did they miss any of them? Or if you're really, really confident, you can forget about the lab and say, I believe the dog. In certain contexts, I hope we get there. We may get there, but for right now, we're not really doing that. We're just demonstrating how well we can do these and figuring all of that stuff out. So here are another couple of little odd things that folks don't often think about. People often ask us, can a dog smell this or that? And the answer is almost always yes. That doesn't mean that we can necessarily deploy dogs to find that target in the real world. So that's Benny. That's actually the dog who was on the snorkels. He used to work for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and this was an expedited parcels project where we were asking whether they could detect contraband, wildlife contraband, in parcels. And it's a different kettle of fish to present a dog nicely with an odor and an olfactometer or in a snorkel or whatever, or to put them in an environment. That's a conveyor belt. Those packages are moving, and Benny's walking on the conveyor belt, smelling each one as they go by. So being able to put them in the place where they're going to do the work is a whole different question, and it's something we spend a lot of time worrying about, especially when we have situations like this, right? Searching containers. That's a refrigerated container. They suck in seeds and then bring seeds all over the world and lots of invasive species. And that's Sammy. That's the world famous. That's in the Falkland Islands. He's the one who found the rat, and 60 times faster than the people. We also worry about and think a lot about safety. This is Cindy Otto. She's the founder and director of the Penn Vet Working Dog Center. Neil Anderson, he's at Edinburgh, and Bess Pierce. She's a 30-year military veterinarian oversees their working dog programs, and they helped us do a safety and security audit for all of our dogs in Zambia to identify the issues. What are the things that we ought to be worrying about? And as part of that, we did a lot of capacity building. Here's how to do an exam for a dog. So that's Jean doing the exams. Penn Vet has fabulous programs called Fit to Work, keeping dogs healthy and fit and warmed up, properly warmed up. This is a stretch. That's actually a village dog who's been trained to track and do detection, warming up, doing a warm-up. Cindy and her teams have demonstrated that dogs' working careers can be extended by up to 2 years by proper fitness and warm-up. Here's one part of it. That's Jean again. Boy, it's a Jean-heavy presentation here. And that's Cindy training Jean to do a plank. That's for core strength on the blocks there. And this is Rudy. Rudy has unfortunately he's a classic shepherd, and because he was rescued, we didn't know his early history. He's developed bad hind end, but it really helps him. It helps him feel good. Rudy is now retired, but it really helped him extend his career, and even in retirement, it just helps him be a lot more comfortable and mobile. Some of you may know this paper. This just came out. This was something we piloted with Cindy in Zambia, training the dogs to dunk their heads, both to cool them off, but also to flush their eyes if they're exposed to anything or whatever, and train them to reach in their Kong and take it out of the water. And it is one of the most effective ways to cool them off. So that's kind of a neat thing. And again, open source, we're teaching everybody else what we learned so that other programs in Africa can maintain high standards for their dogs and keep them healthy. Okay, one last thing I want to leave you with is that we go a lot of places and take dogs there and work with species and the biologists come to us and they say, I've been out here working on this species for 10 years. Nobody's ever come to hear about this and everything. And you guys show up with your dog and here comes the press, So everybody does like a good dog story. And we really recognize that, take advantage of it and say, let's invite the press, particularly for invasive species. That's giant Salvinia man at a fishing tournament in Texas. And we use that as an opportunity to get the story out. Clean your boat, drain your boat, dry your boat, stop at the check stations, do all the things. And the dogs, they get so much press. And some of it's local press and some of it's, international. That's Suta again from the Blackfeet Nation and Michelle Lavara. That Blackfeet story got picked up in outlets, and we stopped counting at 22 states that it went in. So they're really a great opportunity to reach out to policymakers, to people who we justify our budgets to, and also to the communities that we work in to say, dogs are pretty great. So, just to summarize, dogs do a lot of really good stuff. They're good at a lot of things, and they often help in ways that we don't anticipate. Whether that's communications or outreach or doing things that we just never even anticipated. But it's important to do it rigorously and to make sure that it's safe, so that Fenton's got to wear his goggles and do those sorts of things to keep them, because these are professional athletes. They're working dogs. They go big and crazy, and they go hard all the time. So I have gone right up to my time. I don't mind staying to answer questions, but if you have other questions, those are my coordinates. Steve and Casey can share anything else with you guys, and thanks for being here.